and TEWH just go to the back to be ticked off. Well, ticked off. I mean, literally ticked off by the poppers. And PJ McKay and SL, could you come to the front, please? Just do a quick absence on those houses. Great privilege this evening to welcome Peter Tatchell to come and speak on the unfinished struggle for gay rights. Mr. Tatchell is, it's a great privilege to welcome him because he's a genuinely, is a very prominent figure in the public life of this country, coming to prominence for his work on the gay rights issue, but he campaigns across the range of human rights issues, and his work is not restricted to that particular issue. He's a very prominent figure in the media. He's come this very morning from The Big Question in Birmingham, where he appeared live on television speaking about social media and also civil partnership for heterosexual people. Very interesting discussion, which you may wish to ask him about as well. But it really is a great privilege to welcome him to Eton this evening. I hope you will engage. Do ask even critical questions at the end so that we can really get a conversation going. Thank you very much, Peter, for being with us.
Thank you. The title of this talk is The Unfinished Battle for LGBT Human Rights. LGBT stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. I'm sure you know that over the last decade or so, Britain has gone through an extraordinary period of gay law reform. In 1999, we had, by volume, the largest number of anti-gay laws of any country on earth. Yet here we are, just over a decade later, and Britain has some of the best laws on gay rights in the world. So that's been a phenomenal, extraordinary pace of change. In fact, I'd suggest that it is the fastest, most successful law reform campaign in British history and possibly even world history. To think that so many laws have been repealed to end homophobic discrimination in such a short space of time, that is truly a remarkable achievement. So we are today a much more liberal country, not just for LGBT people, but also right across the board, because the struggle for LGBT human rights has been a struggle against intolerance. And by fighting for the rights of LGBT people, we have challenged intolerance, we've challenged prejudice, and that is good for society. We've made Britain a more tolerant, enlightened society. Having said all that, there is still work to be done. We still have one last major law that discriminates against gay and lesbian people, and that is the ban on same-sex marriage. As you know, right now before Parliament, there is a bill to legalise marriages between people of the same sex. That will end a ban that has existed. It will mean that gay couples who love each other will be able to get married. Now, many people say, well, you've had civil partnerships since 2004, 2005. Why are you pushing for same-sex marriage? Well, the reason, of course, is quite simple. The issue is discrimination. To deny gay people the right to get married is discrimination. And in a democratic society, I believe we should all be equal before the law. There shouldn't be any discrimination in any law on the grounds of race, gender, disability, faith or belief, or sexual orientation or gender identity. We should all have the same rights and the same responsibilities. Now, although the government legislation is planning to legalise same-sex marriage, it is not proposing to end the ban on opposite-sex couples from having a civil partnership. So at the moment we have a law which says that gay couples are banned from civil marriages and straight couples are banned from civil partnerships. My view is that both systems should be open to everyone. And the sad thing about the current bill is that David Cameron introduced it because he said the principle of equality is important. Yet he is not supporting, indeed the government is not supporting, ending the ban on straight couples having a civil partnership. So this bill is only a half equality. It's not true full equality. And that is what I think we need to aim for. And I'm delighted that some members of Parliament are supporting an amendment to the same-sex marriage bill to also open up civil partnerships to straight couples. And I'm hoping that that amendment will be carried. David Cameron, as you may know, says he doesn't support heterosexual civil partnerships because he fears it will undermine marriage. Yet I was only meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, a mere 2 weeks ago, where he said he supported the right of heterosexual couples to have a civil partnership. And he believes the law should be equal to allow them that choice. So if the Archbishop of Canterbury supports opposite-sex civil partnerships, why not the Prime Minister? The Archbishop of Canterbury is a passionate believer in marriage. He would not be supporting a policy if he thought it would undermine love and commitment between two people. His support for opposite-sex civil partnerships shows the moral case, even among people of faith, and indeed in his case, the leader of the Anglican Communion worldwide is standing for equality. So let's hope that by the end of this year we do have marriage equality and civil partnership equality. The other unfinished business is, of course, the fact that all of Britain's equality laws include qualified limited exemptions for faith organisations. So in certain circumstances, faith-run schools, hospitals, nursing homes and hospices are allowed to discriminate against people on the grounds of their sexual orientation or gender identity. It's written into the law. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. I'm not suggesting for one moment that people of faith should be compelled to endorse homosexuality. What I'm saying is, in a democratic society, people of faith should be held to the same rules, the same rights, the same responsibilities as everyone else. In other words, there shouldn't be these legal exemptions for faith organisations. Another issue we face is the fact that today many LGBT people who are fleeing homophobic and transphobic persecution in countries like Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria and Uganda, they come here to seek refuge and they are refused because judges seem to have a differential approach when it comes to refugees fleeing homophobic and transphobic persecution. The refusal rate on a first application is much higher for LGBT refugees than political, religious or ethnic refugees. And that would indicate a considerable body of prejudice by both Home Office barristers who oppose the applications and by asylum adjudicators who give rulings on applications for asylum. It is truly shocking to hear the kinds of reasoning that are sometimes used. You'll hear it sometimes said that a very pretty, petite, feminine lesbian is challenged over her sexuality because she doesn't look like a lesbian. Or a very macho, butch man will be questioned over his sexuality because the judge or the Home Office barrister thinks that he doesn't fit the stereotype of a camp, effeminate gay man. Sometimes judges will ask, LGBT refugees, do you read the gay magazine GT? Well, hey, some of these refugees can't read English, so it's very unlikely they would be reading GT magazine. Moreover, most of them are destitute, so they can't afford to buy the magazine. Others will be asked, do you go to the Heaven nightclub in London, a very well-known gay club? Well, if you live in Glasgow, it's very unlikely. This kind of questioning is symbolic of the problem that many LGBT refugees face. Other times, you'll find that LGBT refugees are challenged over whether or not they're actually gay. And of course, all refugees should provide evidence, but in these instances, often the refugees will provide testimonies from their partners or former partners, love letters, photographs, and sometimes we now find that they are told, well, this is just concocted, we don't believe you. Well, how on earth are LGBT refugees supposed to prove their sexuality if photos, witness statements, and so on are not accepted as credible, reliable evidence? The answer is that increasingly, out of desperation, LGBT refugees are being forced and pressured by the Home Office to film themselves having sex with their partners and submit that as evidence to the judges to prove their sexuality. Now, isn't that shocking? Isn't that shameful that we're expecting people to do that in order to prove their legitimate claim to be gay or lesbian? Another issue is, of course, the way in which the laws we have are interpreted and enforced. Although increasingly police and prosecutors crack down on homophobic and transphobic hate crime, although we have good laws to protect LGBT people against hate crime, sometimes those laws are not properly enforced. Some of you may be aware of the case of Sheikh Abdullah Al-Faisal, who in 2004 was arrested, charged, convicted and jailed for 9 years for inciting the murder of Jews and Hindus. Soon afterwards, Imam Abdul Muhid did something very similar, only he didn't incite the killing of Jews and Hindus, he urged the killing of homosexuals. And even though there were 4 witnesses, the Crown Prosecution Service refused to prosecute him, apparently wishing to not inflame sensitivities with the Muslim community. Now, I don't know for certain exactly what the reason was, but the evidence was there, the witnesses were there, and privately I've been told it was about not wishing to cause offence to the Muslim community. Well, first of all, these fanatics do not represent the Muslim community, that's one thing. And it's shocking that any prosecutor should insinuate that they do. And secondly, regardless, everybody in our society should be equal before the law and face the same punishments, the same prosecution, if they incite murder and violence, which are serious criminal offences. The final example I'll give you of unfinished business is homophobic bullying in schools. It's not as bad as it was, but still 55% of young LGBT people say that they have experienced or witnessed bullying of a homophobic nature in their schools. This can range from teasing and name-calling to threats and even actual physical violence. And we know that many schools, about half or nearly half of all schools, still to this day, do not have an anti-bullying program that specifically addresses the issue of homophobic and transphobic bullying. That's really, really shocking, because the consequences of this bullying is that LGBT kids who are victims tend to have a decline in their academic performance. They're more likely to drop out of school and not pursue their educational careers. They're more likely to suffer from depression, suicidal thoughts, and even in extreme cases, actually attempt suicide. That is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable that anybody, for any reason whatsoever, should be under that kind of pressure. So we really do need to have a much more proactive policy in our schools to tackle homophobic bullying. Every school needs to make homophobic bullying as part of their anti-bullying program. And I would like to see what I call lessons in equality and diversity. From the first year of primary school, And why do I say that? Because young people are not born bigoted, they become bigoted. And we know from the trials in some countries or some states and cities that where there is education and equality and diversity, there is much less prejudice and much less bullying. That those young people grow up as adults to be much more mature and open to sexual difference, to racial difference, to faith and belief difference. And that's the kind of society I want to live in, where we have an acceptance of diversity, where people can be different and they won't be bullied or in other ways discriminated against because of that. So lessons in equality and diversity. I would make it a mandatory part of the curriculum where you have to sit exams, so it's actually something that you're tested on. In other words, to make it a serious subject that people take seriously, you've got to have exams. And I would also make it requiring for any applicant for a job to produce their test results in equality and diversity. Because we know that in the workplace, to get the best out of employees, you do need to have employees who get along with each other, who accept each other, and that bullying or harassment in the workplace does undermine the performance of the individual, it undermines the performance of the unit within the business. So it's prejudice and intolerance are bad for business. Prejudice and intolerance are bad for society. I want to live in a society which is cohesive, where people are different but have their place within it, where they're accepted, and where we can get along together. Not in a society where we scapegoat people, where we find it okay to make flippant remarks about people's race or gender or sexuality. And the way to do that is to challenge prejudice in schools. That's a very important, it's not the only answer, but it's a very important way to do it. So that's just a brief summary of some of the unfinished business of the battle for LGBT equality. We have, as I said, come in an enormous way in a very short space of time. And that's a tribute to everyone, gay and straight, who've supported the principle of equality and non-discrimination. Let's go the last mile to finish that task. Thank you. So now it's time for questions, contributions, criticisms from you. Anyone want to start?
Bearing in mind that Reformed Jews are the only religious, or one of the only religious institutions.
Can you shout? Sorry.
Sorry. Bearing in mind that Reformed Judaism is one of the only sort of religious institutions to have accepted gay marriage, do you regret the comments you made likening Lord Chief Rabbi Jacobowitz to Himmler and the effect it had upon liberal Jews who were very much in favour of gay marriage, had the gay agenda on their radar, and have proven themselves subsequently to be very pro the gay agenda?
For those who don't know, I think it's liberal Judaism, not Reformed Judaism. Liberal Judaism supports same-sex marriage and wants the legal right to conduct same-sex marriages in their synagogues. The question referred to a campaign or protest many, many years ago where Lord Jacobowitz, then the chief rabbi, said that if it was possible, he would support scientific endeavours to eradicate homosexuality. So myself and the gay rights group Outrage published a leaflet putting his quote next to that of Heinrich Himmler, who made very similar comments in the 1930s. Both men wanted to eradicate homosexuality. So we were drawing comparisons and pointing out that this was shocking for a chief rabbi of the Jewish community, which had suffered so much under Nazism, to echo the views of the Nazi leadership, which sought the eradication of homosexuality. That was not an attack upon liberal Jews, it was to support liberal Jews and to put Lord Jacobowitz on the spot over his extreme intolerant, bigoted remarks. So I have no regrets about doing that. Those who promote such ideas deserve to be called out.
mentioned that there was there's a difference between civil partnership and marriage, but you never explained to us what it is. Is there a large difference between them in legal rights, or is it merely just whether one is religious or not?
Well, in this country we have basically three kinds of relationship recognition. We have religious marriages, then we have civil marriages in registered offices, and then we have civil partnerships. At the moment, civil marriages, which are separate from religious ones, are only open to heterosexual couples. Civil partnerships are only open to gay couples. So we've got two mutually exclusive systems. Civil marriages for straight couples only, civil partnerships for gay couples only. The principle involved is one of sexual segregation, or if you want to be more provocative, sexual apartheid. One law for straight couples, another law for gay couples. That to me is fundamentally wrong. That's the mentality of apartheid, which had separate laws for black and white people in South Africa in the bad old days. I want to see a single framework of law that is equal for everyone. Now the differences are actually quite small. The differences between a civil partnership and a civil marriage are negligible. So that begs the question, why have two mutually exclusive systems? If they're both very similar, why not allow straight couples to have a civil partnership? Why not allow a gay couple to have a civil marriage? You know, we know that marriage is the gold standard. It's the one system that's recognised all around the world. Civil partnerships are hardly known and hardly recognised anywhere. So it's obvious that gay people would want the gold standard. And of course, not all gay people, nor all straight people will want to get married. Some don't believe in marriage. Some, like me, share the feminist critique. You know, marriage has got a long patriarchal history. I wouldn't want to get married. But I'm a Democrat, so I defend the right of other people to get married if they wish. I'm also a gay rights campaigner, so I oppose the homophobia of the ban on same-sex civil marriage. And moreover, I also oppose the heterophobia of the ban on opposite-sex civil partnerships. I am equally opposed to all discrimination.
How advanced are gay rights in Britain compared to in other countries?
As I said, you know, we are now in the upper regions of the best countries. Basically, most West European countries are pretty advanced, plus Canada and even South Africa. But sadly, the United States, the great, well, some people say the greatest democracy in the world, is relatively behind. Not just on same-sex marriage, but on employment protection, against discrimination in the workplace, on a whole range of issues, the US does lag behind. And it's fantastic that recently Argentina, Uruguay, New Zealand, and France have all legalized same-sex marriage. They're debating it even in the Colombian parliament. And there's moves in Taiwan. It is a global trend. And it's often non-European countries that are leading the way. Okay.
What's your view on positive discrimination?
I think positive discrimination has its place, but it's not an ideal. It's sort of a second best. I can understand why some people may feel it's necessary to, for example, ensure that there are more women represented in Parliament. At the moment, Britain really lags behind in the proportion of women MPs compared to most other Western countries. We're way, way down the list. There are countries like Rwanda that are far, far better than us. So I think some initiative needs to be taken there. I think I'm not opposed to all women shortlists, for example. I think they have a place. But I think also we do need to try and focus more on giving people the hand up and the expertise, the training, so that we choose people based on merit. And there certainly are women and ethnic minority peoples of merit who often don't get a look in, and that needs to be consciously addressed, because the Parliament And all the social institutions in our society should be reflective of the wider society.